אנו מכריזים בזאת
Hello, I'm Barry Shaw, and this is the view from Israel. Now, as some of you know, I've been traveling by video throughout Europe, investigating and asking experts over there the phenomenon of current contemporary anti-Semitism, and is there a link to the anti-Israelism that's going on in different countries. And today I've landed in Great Britain, in London, and I'm happy to have as my guest an expert on anti-Semitism in the UK, David Collier. Welcome to the view from Israel, David.
Oh, Barry, thank you for having me on.
Right, you have a blog called the Beyond the Great Divide, Truth Matters. Why did you create this blog, and what are the contents? What's the purpose of creating it, and what have you found in your investigations?
Well, I think the blog itself gets to the heart of the matter, in that I was finding that the conversations taking place over the conflict between Israel and its neighbors were based mainly on myth and lies. And I wanted to tell the truth. So I started to write about what it was that was happening. And more, I began to see that the problems, certainly in Europe, the US, were rooted in anti-Semitism. So I started to focus more and more on anti-Semitism. Now, today, the blog is actually known as something that researches anti-Semitism within anti-Israel activity.
I want us to have a wide-ranging conversation and address some of the issues. And I want to start off by talking about some of the more recent egregious incidents of anti-Semitism taking place in London. We had the incident at Hanukkah of a bus containing young Jewish kids being attacked on Oxford Street. And there was a problem in the way that the BBC described it. Would you like to tell our viewers about the incident itself, who perpetrated it, if you can tell me this, and how did the BBC cover it?
Yeah, this is it's quite a great example of how bad the situation has got in media reporting in the United Kingdom. There was a busload of Jewish children. Many of them had Israeli citizenship. They were out celebrating the second night of Hanukkah, and they were in the centre of London, in Oxford Street. They'd got off the bus, they'd got back on the bus, and then they were attacked, effectively, by a gang, a group of what seemed to be young Islamist men who started banging on the side of the bus, doing the Hitler salute. They took off their shoes and they're banging the windows. And it's quite intimidating to watch, a bunch of kids, and there were these thugs, these Islamist thugs, attacking them. So it was something that you would expect to be roundly condemned. But the BBC went out of its way. We had full video footage, and the BBC somehow in that footage manages to hear an anti-Muslim slur. Now, we don't believe that slur exists. In fact, the piece of audio that they claim is an anti-Muslim slur seems to be someone in Hebrew calling for help. So, but I mean, there's two issues here. Firstly, if you have a video of victims, you don't go through their audio trying to find something that they may or may not have said as a way of balancing it out. You have an attacker and you have a victim. You deal with the victims. It's like putting a microphone next to someone who is being attacked or raped or whatever and saying, oh, I wonder if I can find anything that she said while it was going on. It's absolutely outrageous that the BBC did this in the first place. Forget the fact that it doesn't exist, but the fact that that was their motivation. Their motivation here was to downplay the Islamist side of the attack. It was to whitewash it, to basically turn around and say, oh, these boys were provoked. So there was that side of it. And then, of course, what makes it even worse is we don't believe that that slur even exists. It's not clear, which means they're imagining that they're hearing it. So the original person who took the footage says that when he gave the BBC that report, the slur wasn't included. Then it goes into the BBC editorial machine, and there are apparently three or four people that tampered with that report, and one of them, somewhere along the line, added an anti-Muslim slur, the anti-Muslim slur claim. So absolutely disgraceful and indicative of a major problem we have in the media, that people are running over themselves to try to whitewash the dangers or downplay the dangers of the rise of the Islamist community in Europe, or specifically in this case in the United Kingdom.
Why do you think it is that the BBC, The Guardian, and some other parts of the media so blatantly anti-Israel, at the same time so snidely anti-Jewish? And let me add to this, because you wrote that Wikipedia is you called it a central conduit for the spread of anti-Semitism. So explain all that in a bundle if you can.
How long have we got? Okay, let's start with The Guardian and the BBC and so on. There's two things going on here. The first is the hard left, the progressive cancel culture, hard left, the identity politics is at the center today of Guardian, BBC, reporting. So there's that strain within the BBC, The Guardian, especially The Independent, that pushes an anti-Israel, anti-Jewish notion, if you like. But there's also the new Islamist strain where in the editorial team in The Guardian, in the editorial team in the BBC, you have Islamists. And if you have Islamists sitting around a table when you're deciding what it is you want to talk about or who you want to attack, Israel's always going to be at the top. And you're going to get no opposition on that from the hard left progressive types. So what you have today are outlets like the BBC and The Guardian that are not only anti-Israel at their core, they're obsessively so. And there are no forces within those organizations to try to balance it out. That's the problem there. Wikipedia, I think, is an even bigger problem. And I have trouble trying to get across to people how dangerous Wikipedia actually is. The first response I get is, well, anyone can edit Wikipedia, which is an absolute myth. Not everybody can edit Wikipedia, and I challenge anybody who's watching to go onto Wikipedia, to go to any page on Israel and to try to edit a single comma out of them, because they won't succeed. And if they continue to stick to their ground and try to do it, they'll eventually get banned. Those pages are protected. Everything to do with Jews, Zionism, Israel are protected pages on Wikipedia. The second issue is numbers. We are, 15 million people in the world. So how many of those people, of our 15 million people, are going to take the time to be some obsessive Wikipedia editor? Our enemies number in the billions. And they're there, and they've been there a long time, and they control the roost, because if pro-Zionist or Jewish editors go in, they're simply outnumbered and overwhelmed, and they're out-argued. I can give you a couple of cases in the research I did on Wikipedia. The one good thing about Wikipedia is it's entirely transparent, which means you can see every argument that has ever taken place on every single page. It's all there, it's all visible, it's in their engine. Their engine is completely open. So it's great for researchers like me. So you can go in and you can have a look at how a page was created. There's a page called the Israel Lobby in the United Kingdom. Okay, so you said it's a red flag for a start. But you go in and you can see who created the page. And the page was created by a neo-Nazi. So when someone looks for, Israel lobby or, pro-Israel forces in the United Kingdom, they're directed to a page that was created by a neo-Nazi. Now, Google makes it worse, because Google is so lazy that it decides to give Wikipedia as the top return on almost every search result. So Google's telling you to go to this page that was created by a neo-Nazi. And then you ask the question, well, what is a page like this going to attract? What you attract is anti-Semites. So the actual history of the page, it was written by anti-Semites, and it's there as a Wikipedia page. And our children at school and students in university, no matter what they say, use Wikipedia as a first port of call. Even if they're going to go and do research elsewhere, they're going to start with Wikipedia, and they use Wikipedia as a source to give other sources. But the only sources in Wikipedia are the ones that the Wikipedia editors want to be there. You know, the page on Ayash, for example, the engineer, the mastermind of the bombs, the suicide bombs during the Oslo process, it read like a sympathetic biography. Somebody had edited out the number of people that the bombs had killed. So when you went into the page, it spoke about the fact that he was an engineer, he's for Hamas, and then it talks about how warm and loving he was and what a nice person. And then it turns around and says he wanted to go and study in Jordan, but the Israelis stopped him, basically giving you a side of, and we're talking about a rancid terrorist here that slaughtered or helped to slaughter countless people on buses and in clubs, and Wikipedia had turned him into this kind of idol. And when you go into the editors who are doing this, one of the editors has a profile page, and that profile page carries a symbol, and the symbol, it's like a meme, and it says, I support the right for all kinds of resistance, and I can't name the groups that I support because I'd probably get banned. Well, this is basically someone turning around and saying they support groups like Islamic Jihad, Hamas, and Hezbollah. So these are the people that are writing Wikipedia, and this website is one of the most used websites in the world. So we have to accept the fact that Wikipedia is probably, I think definitely, spreading more lies and more anti-Semitism and shaping more minds against Zionism than any other source on the planet.
Well, it's funny you should say that, but I add something else to your argument. It's my experience with Wikipedia more recently, in the past, even going back 10 years or 11 years when I was researching one of my first books, Israel Reclaiming the Narrative. I had plenty of books, supplies of books here, but when I was looking for further corroboration, I used to go to Wikipedia and find some of the quotations that are in the book. Or more recently, when I've been doing research for articles or for talks, I find that Wikipedia have a mission by what I call deletion, because a lot of the material that I found 8-10 years ago no longer there. Doesn't matter if I go down to page 30, 40, or 50, simply eradicated from Wikipedia. And I found a limitation on the material that was there 10 years ago, but is not there anymore. But let's move the conversation further. Let's discuss what's driving the expansion of anti-Israel and also anti-Semitism in the UK. I know a few years ago, you wrote an article of what anti-Israel boycotters are saying when they think we're not listening. It really detailed a bit of your anecdotal history when you were beginning to go out and investigate what was behind the anti-Semitism. And you went to a lot of meetings where you needed to be, even then, I guess, a brave Jew to attend. I guess you went anonymously this, and you began to speak to the people who were creating the narrative at that time of how they're going to attack Israel. I don't know whether you want to share with us some of your anecdotal memories of initially going back a number of years of how the creation of the anti-Israel narrative took place and who were the perpetrators of them.
Okay, firstly, I'm an old guy. My memory is, fading a little bit. Over time, I've evolved in that I can't, it's difficult for me to remember specific incidents of what took place. Rather, I formed a global picture of what was happening, and I moved on. But yeah, there were a number of years, not just days, but years, where I was unknown. It was before I was writing publicly, where I put on a kafir, BDS badge, Free Palestine badge, and I went to these events. I joined their groups. I became friends with them on Facebook, not as me, but obviously under a pseudonym. And I built up a large profile. And I would go and they would see me and say hello because I was a regular face. So I would talk to them. And it was frightening, actually, is probably the best word, where you would watch, it's almost like you're watching a choreographed performance. You'd go in and many of these events were the same. You'd go in, you'd sit down, depending on where the event was taking place and who was controlling it would dictate the demographic. If it was the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, or War on Want, or one of these NGOs, the anti-Israel NGOs, then the audience will be predominantly white, hard left. And if it was the groups like the Friends of Al-Aqsa or the these Islamist student societies, then obviously it would be a completely different demographic. So that would be different. But the basic concept would be the same, is obviously coordinated. There would be normally 3 speakers. You would have somebody coming on, normally Jewish, an anti-Zionist Jew, basically talking about how Israel is wayward, how Israel doesn't represent Jews, how it's not really the Jewish state, how there's always been a major Jewish voice against Zionism, etc., which basically tells the audience it's okay to be anti-Israel. The second would come on talking about how awful Israel is and all these bad things that Israel is doing, and there would be a third which would normally come on and explain BDS, which is the boycott movement. So it's a progression here. The first one enables the people. The second one tells them why they should boycott Israel. The third one would be someone saying how you should boycott people, how you should boycott Israel. And then if there was a fourth, it would be a activist from the PA areas, normally somewhere like Hebron or Bethlehem, was somewhere on the ground where there's conflict, who would come as a personal witness. This is always very important, the personal witness, or a refugee from Gaza. Personal witness to personalize the entire thing. And you'd hear this constant stream of lies, but it's all wrapped up in keywords. This is the important thing. It's all wrapped up in humanitarian rights, the self-determination, one democratic state, how everyone should be equal, how it's really wrapped up in pure, well put together keywords. It's influential. It's convincing. And then what I would do is I would go to the audience during the breaks and I would talk to them, and you hear a completely different story. The actual knowledge just isn't there. They have no support for what it is they believe. They mix and match misplaced words, Zionist and Jew. So you could be talking to one and he'd say Zionist, and then halfway through the conversation he'd reference Jew. And it would all be about basically just reclaiming, certainly in the Islamist spaces, reclaiming Jerusalem as an Islamist space because Jews have absolutely no right to be there. And you're beginning to understand, well, actually, what they're talking about on stage is just a front. It's a mask for what's taking place underneath, which is raw, unfiltered Jew hate.
Yes, I know. As I said, this article of yours referred to a number of meetings that you attended. One was by the Arab Organization of Human Rights in the UK, and another one that you reported. What I'm getting at here is trying to uncover not just the anti-Israelism, if they want to criticize Israel, that's one thing, but the anti-Semitism behind it. And you had went to an event in Islington of a pro-Palestinian group. I think it was called the Friends of Yipna. and you related in your article about sitting next to one of the people over there who turned to, I think it was a woman, and no, to a man, and he actually whispered or told you that he'd been sitting next to a pro-Israeli activist who he called a Jew. He related things to you that were clearly anti-Semitic. I don't know whether you could corroborate or you remember that particular part of your article.
That's right. It wasn't actually in Camden. It was in
Islington.
No, it wasn't. The group, that man was from a group in Islington. The event itself took place near Euston Station. It's a small venue that puts on a lot of anti-Israel remarks. This guy was sitting, I think, either just in front of me. He turned around and we had this conversation. And yeah, absolutely. And this is not unsurprising. This is the whole point. This is what they think. This is what they feel. I was at an event. It was a pro-Hezbollah march, would you believe? It was on Al-Quds Day in the beginning of June in London, where I went into the pro-Hezbollah crowd, and I'm standing there and I've got my camera going, always have my camera going. And the guy who's got the microphone is trying to whip up the crowd before they start the march. And he starts going on about how the Jews, the Jewish rabbis, the Zionist, but he calls them Zionist rabbis. And this is the important thing, that after a while you learn that you have to stop hearing the word Zionist, because they're not actually meaning Zionist. I'll come back to that in a second, but he's going on about how we were responsible for the Grenfell disaster, which was a fire that took down a tower block. And this is I was on the streets of central London, out in the open, a guy with a megaphone, basically talking horrific blood libels about how Jews are out there killing innocent, poor, normally a lot of black people in central London tower blocks, over greed, over money. It was all about money. And it's shocking to hear this. And when I was, because I also obviously infiltrated a lot of these groups online, and I saw a learning curve. And it's really important to understand this, that someone had gone out and is talking about Jews, and only about Jews. I want to kill all the Jews, was basically what he said. A few years later, that guy is saying, I want to kill all the Zionists. Now, he means the same thing. All that's happened is that he's learned what is more acceptable in anti-Zionist communities. They learn how to behave. In a group called Palestine Live, that no doubt we'll touch on at some point, because our ex-Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn was caught inside it. There was an incident where someone had called Jew Nazi. Someone said, oh, I hate those Jew Nazis. It's pretty obvious that this guy is a rabid anti-Semite. But the responses to that post were so enlightening, because people, left-wing, hard left-wing, Jewish anti-Zionists came in and said, you shouldn't say Jew Nazi. Say Zio-Nazi. That's acceptable. And the guy started to say Zio-Nazi. So what we have it's almost like a boot camp, where these groups are being formed, where anti-Semites are within, and they're learning how to talk in a manner which can cover up their anti-Semitism and allows for people on the outside to say, oh, that person's just an anti-Zionist. It's not really an anti-Semite. And you see this kind of thing going on all the time.
You mentioned the words boot camp, David, and you can't have any better boot camp for anti-Israel anti-Semitism than the British Academia, the campuses in Great Britain. We had the Israeli ambassador, Sipi Hotavele, chased out of a London university and physically threatened at an event she'd been invited to talk to at the London School of Economics. And there in Britain, the Education Secretary, Gavin Williamson, spoke of the alarming rate of anti-Semitism within education in the UK. So speak to us, if you can, about the the rising development of the indoctrinators, both the lecturers and the students themselves, that on campuses in Great Britain?
Well, the indoctrination has been there a long time. We're going back now decades. There's a few elements to this. And firstly, absolutely what happened to Hottervelli outside, I think, the LSE was disgraceful. I was at an event at UCL, University College London, about 3 years ago. It was, we were chased over campus. Firstly, the room that we wanted to hold the students wanted to hold the event in. I'm just obviously there doing my job because I knew there was going to be trouble. They couldn't get access because anti-Israel activists had basically blocked the room. So we then sneaked out somewhere else. And you've got this group of Jews having to sneak around campus to try to find a room in which they would be able to have their event. And eventually, when we had the event, a whole group circled us outside. A couple broke in through the windows to try to stop the event. And to leave, we were kettled by the police, which means that the police are called and they have to ensure our safety. So they circle us, they only let us out when they're ready to let us out. And as we go out in single file, surrounded by police to protect us from the act. This is the state of Jews in the United Kingdom on campus. People may turn around and say that's just an exceptional example. Well, what do you mean an exceptional example? Why should, I mean, this is the centre of London. It's not some barn out in the sticks somewhere. This is the centre of London. It was an event. There were Jewish people there, and this is what happened. So it shows you the atmosphere on campus. I personally was attacked, assaulted. I was at an event at King's, which is another, there's like 3 universities quite close together. Actually, there's more, but the 3 central ones close together. And I was filming an anti-Israel demonstration against, I can't remember who was there, but there was an anti-Israel demonstration taking place outside campus. I was filming, I was assaulted. Someone tried to grab my camera and break it. And we got involved in a struggle. I managed somehow to hold on to it. I got hurt. Some part of the camera equipment got broken. And obviously Hottervelli, this is an ongoing thing. When we've seen demonstrations throughout the United Kingdom, when Jews want to be proud, when they want to wave the Israeli flag, when they want to talk about the conflict, there will be demonstrations and they can turn violent. And here things have changed. When we're talking about the toxicity of campus, that's pretty much been there for decades. We've had Marxist academics for a long time. And the problem with this is that academia contains schools of thought. And you have professors who are supervising their PhD candidates, which is effectively almost like a clone exercise. So if you have a Marxist academic who is being a supervisor to lots of students, then what he's producing is lots of little Marxists. And over time, this propagates it's almost like a family. I call it an academic family. I can give you an example. And this is David Miller. David Miller has recently been fired from Bristol University over comments that he made about Zionists and Zionist students. Some of the comments, I'm not going to go into them here, it's all searchable online. Some of the comments were truly outrageous, basically implied that Jewish students or part of were pawns of the Israeli embassy. And he supervised several candidates whilst at Bath University before he went to Bristol. And one of those has gone on to be an academic at another university. Another one has gone on to be an anti-Israel activist. Another one is an anti-Israel journalist. David Miller himself came from Glasgow, and he was part of the thought of another group of academics, like Greg Philo is one. And you can turn around and you build family trees. You can see how these trees are starting off with one well-known academic and spreading out. Exeter is another example. Exeter is a campus that has a massive amount of funding from the Gulf area, from the Gulf, to create an Islamist, an Islamic department. Within that Islamic department is their Middle Eastern history. So the history on Exeter University is not being taught in the history department, it's being taught under the guidance of those running the Islamic department. Who do they employ? They employ people like Ilham Pape and Gada Kami. Ilham Pape is a well-known anti-Israel, he's an Israeli, but he's an anti-Israel historian. He basically left Haifa University in disgrace. He's the one that wrote the book on the ethnic cleansing that suggests that what happened in 1948 was an ethnic cleansing. The guy's a conspiracy theorist. But he's there churning out, it's almost like a conveyor belt. And he's putting all of these PhD candidates they come out as, they go on to be doctors and professors on other universities, toxifying the academic space. We've lost it. Any pro-Israeli or Zionist academic will tell you we've lost the academic space. Jews have been strangled out. If you go in with anything other than an anti-Israel mindset, your papers won't be published, you won't get peer reviewed, you won't get sponsorships, you won't get placements. We've been exiled from the academic community. And within that space, and this is something that I said to people following the attack on Cooltv-se, was you see all these students outside and they're banging, trying to get at Cooltv-se, and there was outrage. There were statements by the Prime Minister and a few other people about how horrific it was. Everybody's angry at the students. But how can you blame the students? They go to a university and you're teaching them. What they're learning in the university is making them angry. So why are you not angry at the professors who are telling them the lies? Because that's where the problem starts. It starts with academia, with the professors. We've lost the academic space. And to be honest, I don't see a way of retrieving it. I don't know how we get it back.
Well, I can tell you my opinion happening on campus. When academic freedom of thought and expression is forcefully closed with threats and harassments, as you've described, by people displaying hate and loathing for one race and one people, it is no longer academia. It's become the institute of dogma. It's become the industry of lies. And it's also become a conveyor belt producing indoctrinated activists who go out into the world and become the next generation's influence and opinion makers. In other words, the poison spreads. David, I often like quoting Manchester author Howard Jacobson, who once wrote, I think he even said it at an event, when Israel becomes more fascist than the fascists and more Nazi than the Nazis, that practices an apartheid that exceeds the apartheid of South Africa, an Israel that's guilty of every crime against humanity, and perhaps some that haven't been discovered yet. And when thousands of rockets are launched to Israel and we respond grudgingly, it's always called disproportionate. So when that happens, we need a new type of language to describe the intellectual crime that goes against all reason, of simplifying history to match a false narrative as well. And we need another word for criticism. And this is the problem that's going on, and it's emanating out of the campuses. Because, David, at the end of the day, it's not about Israel or Jews at all. It's really about the way that thought is being taught and practiced in Britain right now. It's about the forcing of the closing of opposing minds on campus. And then when they do that, it's no longer academia, it becomes dogma. And it's no wonder that it spills out on the streets of London. And now, I want to move on to another measure. This is to do with, I'm happy you talked about something, not happy, but really you've highlighted something that I've seen to be true in a number of European countries. It's the unholy alliance between the far left and the Islamists. And there was no better case of this than in Corbyn's Labour Party. Now, I thought the defeat of Corbyn was a clear indictment by British voters against the Labour Party's rampant anti-Semitism. And I thought things would get better, but I understand you've got a different perspective of that.
Yeah, I think we overestimate sometimes our ability to influence and what other people think or care about. I would imagine that the vast majority of the British community don't actually care about the Jews very much at all, or think about us at all. What happened to Corbyn was fortunate. The Jews were very, very lucky. And they were lucky because the person who was standing there trying to be Prime Minister, who was head of the Labour Party, had other views that the British electorate really didn't like. He has a history of associating with Marxist causes. He has a history of supporting the IRA. He has a history of basically allying himself with every enemy of the United Kingdom. So when we were out there banging on about anti-Semitism within the Labour Party, the press, which were attacking Corbyn, saw us as a useful tool. Not all of them. Some journalists out there, they get it, and we had good friends, but a lot of the noise, the fact that anti-Semitism was in the papers almost every day, was not really about the anti-Semitism, but it was part of an anti-Corbyn campaign that the press saw us as convenient allies. If Corbyn had been someone the establishment had wanted, even with the same level of anti-Semitism, which absolutely existed, we would have had a very difficult time getting any mention at all in the press. The press wouldn't have been interested. So absolutely, I see this as different. And I think that the self-confidence or the overconfidence that some elements of the Jewish community in the United Kingdom feel today because we've got rid of him is deeply misplaced. All of the pillars that placed Corbyn as leader of the main opposition party, a central mainstream party in the United Kingdom, are still in place. The demographic that voted for him is still there. He wasn't far off a victory in 2017. They're all still there. And the anti-Israel side of it has only got worse. So, I see things very differently. I look at a growing problem. I think that we had a victory in a battle in an ongoing war, which is great, but we shouldn't look at it as any more than that. And the forces that are allied against us are strong, they're powerful, they outnumber us, they're growing, they're more dynamic than we are, they care less about public opinion than we do, and they're led by stronger leaders than we are, which is another problem.
David, you wrote an article whose title intrigued me. What type of Jew do we want to be? I want you to explain that. Also, I want to ask you the question, have we lost the Jewish youth in Britain? By that I mean that too many of them seem to be siding with the enemy. I call them, as you'll see in some of my other videos, I call them the lost tribe of Israel, because I think they've lost their moral compass and they've gone into a very dark place, and they find themselves among the enemies, not only of Israel, but of Jews themselves. And what are your conclusions about the fate and the future of British Jews as you survey recent and ongoing events in Britain?
Okay, I'll start off by putting my own view on the line, which is that I don't believe that the British Jews have a future. I just don't see Jews have a future in the United Kingdom. I think that a generation, maybe, but certainly 2 generations from now, there'll be orthodoxy, absolutely, in their communities, in places like Stamford Hill, and in a new community they're building on Canvey Island. So we'll see that. And we'll see a few diehards here and there. But the actual Jewish community that at the moment that was 400,000 strong, that is now less than 300,000 strong, will have gone. it will be a minority of a minority with very, very little voice in the United Kingdom. I cannot see beyond that. And the reason is, and this is why I wrote the article, I put out something on social media yesterday or the day before where I said, look, 2 out of every 3 Jews were wiped out in the Holocaust. So 2 out of every 3 European Jews were wiped out in the Holocaust. 98 out of every 100 Jews living in Muslim majority nations fled or were expelled. Jews should be thankful that today we live in a world that has an Israel, a Jewish state that knows how to defend itself. And I think that basic premise is no longer passed on within the Jewish community. Forget about our allies, forget about people who may be Zionist out there. I'm talking about the Jewish community. In our schools, in the Jewish schools, Jewish faith schools, in our youth clubs, in our mainstream organizations, we're always apologetic. We're trying to tone down our pride. We're trying to reach out to the other side. Well, this is insane. Why on earth would you reach out to a side that wants to annihilate you when you only want to be half dead? It really is an insane policy. But what's happening is that it has real world effect. And this is the problem. I don't care whether our leaders want to be stupid. I don't care whether they want to be cowards. They can do what they want to do. But their activity has a real world effect. Because I think you can be Jewish nationally, you can be Jewish religiously, you can be any combination of those 2 elements that you want to be. But if you try to be a Jew without nation and a Jew without religion, then you've got nothing left to give to your children. Nothing. You've got no pride. You stand there and you light candles once a year on Hanukkah, and you have some kind of half Seder meal, and then you go off and eat bread the following day. If that's all you've got, your children are never going to pick it up. And if in parallel to that, what you're doing is you're saying, yes, and look what those nasty Jews did to those poor Palestinians in 1948, this Nakba, and we're seeing this horrific entry of Nakba, the word Nakba, into Jewish dialogue. I mean, it's a myth. It really is a myth. There was a civil conflict in 1947 and 48 that the Arabs wanted started and lost. And yes, that was a catastrophe for them. But that was a war they wanted started and lost. This notion of this Nakba that I'm seeing from left-wing Jewish groups. I saw a left-wing Jewish group talk about Nakba denial is as bad as Holocaust denial. This is absolutely obscene.
Okay, so I'm currently just outside the Houses of Parliament. That huge structure behind me in scaffolding is actually Big Ben. It's just in disguise today. I'm here because Yachad, a pro-Israel left-wing organisation in the UK, have called on the British Jewish community to say Kaddish, the mourner's prayer, for the victims of the recent Gaza conflict. Now, the difficulty for me with that is that the majority of casualties were actually Hamas operatives. Out of the 60 or so people who were killed in the recent outburst of violence, out of the 60, over 50, according to Hamas, were Hamas operatives. They've actually named at least 24 of them. And so I'm here to talk to the Jews that are here to say Kaddish for effectively Hamas, to understand why they're here.
كان الجولة الأخيرة استشهد 62 شهيد. نعم. منهم 50 شهيد من حماس.
And the reason we're seeing this is because we have stopped educating our children about Israel. We've stopped educating them about Jewish pride. We're too scared of appearing to be anti-Muslim if we speak too much about what Islamists are doing. I've got 2 recent examples from school. This is personal examples. My daughter was approached by a teacher at school. The teacher said, "Oh, I saw you at an Israel demonstration a few weeks ago." Well, my daughter was quite surprised, turned around and said, "Well, I didn't see you." To which the teacher said, "No, I was on the other side." So the teacher is basically telling the pupil that she's an anti-Israel activist. And the second example was even more recent. It comes from Hanukkah, where my son is in a class, and the teacher mentions the Maccabees and trying to place them into perspective, says they're a group like the Taliban. And now the problem with this is that we're not teaching the children about the Maccabees, but the children know who the Taliban are. So this is how they build their mindset. They're growing up thinking, oh, the Maccabees are like the Taliban. Well, I wouldn't want to be any part of that. So absolutely we're losing Jewish youth. But this is coming because we are failing them. The community is failing the Jewish youth. It's not arming them with the necessary information that they need to hold that identity together. So how can we possibly complain when they don't manage to hold it together themselves?
And it ends up with Jewish groups. I don't know whether it was J Street or Yachad or Jewish Voices for Palestine, who held a Kaddish in Parliament Square on behalf of dead Hamas terrorists. It's a terrible thing. You know, I read an article about a phenomenon that is called learned helplessness. It really was applied in the article for individuals. It's like, for instance, women who are suffering from abusive husbands learn to live with that condition rather than do something against the condition they're living in. I find another aspect. Basically, it's like a minority population have learned to coil up, to become anonymous, to avoid confrontations in the hope that it'll keep yourself. And this has been the Jewish experience throughout the ages, and it's never worked. And Jews seem to do it when the temperature of anti-Semitism rises. I found it in my conversations as I go through Europe, for instance, and it seems to be happening in Britain, with a few individual exceptions. But on the other hand, I found that the people who escape this sort of mindset, this what I call it, the learned helplessness, and make Aliyah and come to Israel, they come with a passion and an enthusiasm and a resolve to be a more active member of the society over here. I think there's a lesson in this of what potentially, sadly, could be the fate of Jews in Britain. I want to thank you, David, for your contributions of sharing some of even your personal anecdotes and experience. I hope the viewers watch this, share the video. Thank you, David, for being on the show.
Thanks very much for having me. The fight must go on.
Exactly, that's exactly the word. And the fight, ladies and gentlemen, is up to you now who are watching this video. I want you to click the like button, click the subscribe button of this video. It helps highlight and gets it out to more people. And please share it with others. This is Barry Shaw, The View from Israel, saying thank you for watching.
אנו מכריזים בזאת